Check this one.
Hello. Thank you so much, Mayank, and welcome everybody to the second Awaken Florida Festival here at this beautiful space that's been created by the Singhs. Krishna Mohan Bhatt, thank you so much for being with us. And of course, George Brooks is an old friend, this amazing saxophonist that some of you may have heard yesterday. And if you haven't, we will get them to perform in between our conversation today. So, George, I'm going to start with you. How did you discover Indian music? And was it before you grew your hair, or was it part of the package?
No, the hair just happened. But it was before I grew my hair, because I think when my first child was born, a daughter, she's now 37. I don't know, I kind of like the little barrettes that little girls have with like butterflies, so I started sticking them in the back of my hair, and eventually it got long. But Indian music, I first heard, actually, I was a student at New England Conservatory of Music. I was there to study jazz. It was one of the first classical conservatories in the US to have a jazz program. And there was a sitarist who had just arrived from living in India for 7 years, an American named Peter Rowe. And although I had a bunch of required courses I had to take, I just on a whim took an elective called a Survey of Indian Classical Music. And it blew my mind, honestly. As soon as I heard it, I was like, this is something I have to try to figure out how to play. I was very young in my development of any kind of music, and so I didn't know what I was doing, and I was learning sargam, I was learning to understand the rhythm cycles a little bit, but I immediately started attempting to replicate what I was hearing on recordings, and recordings with the old masters, Drupad music with the Dagger brothers, and people like Vijay Jog and Ram Narayan. So.
And Krishnaji, very different from the Western tradition in the Indian or North Indian classical tradition, and of course in the Carnatic tradition. This is not about learning sheet music. It's not reading sheet music. It's really learning, which is both a philosophy as well as imbibing a tradition. Tell us a little bit about your trajectory and how you started with music, because it was you come from a gharana.
Yes.
A gharana is a school, is an equivalent of a school of music. And that's where you've emanated from. Did you have a choice to want to become a banker or
Well,
something?
I was told that I should not be a musician because that's the hardest thing to be and for family. But the more they refused me, the more I got into it. And I was, born in the family of musicians. And then grew up listening to all kinds of music, folk to courtesans to ragas and folk musicians. And, I'm not a very good talker, so I can play. But I realized that I was exposed to music from the very childhood, all kinds of music. I used to listen to the radio and listen to Bach and Beethoven on the radio in those times. And it also, I grew up listening to great musicians of India, like Vilad Khan Sahab, Ravi Ji, Nikhil Banerjee, Bada Ghulam Ali Khan Sahab, Amir Khan. And it just drove me crazy listening to that. Wow, if these, what a beautiful tradition it is. And it takes whole lifetime to master, and the whole music of the world is based on 12 notes, so that's what was fascinating.
Do you want to tell us what this instrument is and tell us how this instrument is made?
Yeah, basically the sound comes from this gourd. It's a gourd, and the rest of this.
It's a dried gourd, which is then
It's dried and
cured and carved.
Yes, and the neck, I believe it's teak teak wood. And then it's handcrafted, so very carefully the frets. And fascinating part of this music is it's mostly improvised like jazz tradition. And another thing is that most Indian instruments are designed, fashioned to imitate the voice. So we can get 5 notes from one fret, which is a special thing.
And how many strings does this have?
You know, we have 6, 7 main playing strings and then sympathetic strings that we tune to the raga that we are playing, and they resonate.
So did you want to just show us an example?
Yes.
And maybe an afternoon or an early evening raga? So the raga tradition, of course, as many of you know, follows the time of the day, but it also follows the season. It also follows the moon and the sun and all the constellations. It's a little complicated. Krishna Mohan,
Resonance.
go ahead.
No, I was saying the resonance you hear is because of the sympathetic strings.
So the voice is the most perfect instrument,
Yes, I would.
and all instruments are then sort of created in its copy?
I think the sitar is the most perfect instrument. I feel so jealous that I don't have sympathetic strings. I mean, Krishna picks up his, I met Krishna as we said about 40 years ago, and he was the first Indian musician that I got to know as a friend. And I would sit in front of him and watch him tune these sympathetic strings, which are so glorious and so magical, and they create this world. He plays one note, and of course you have to tune it perfectly and beautifully, which Krishna does. And then he strikes one note, and suddenly the entire raga is evoked with that one note. And I feel so
Challenged.
just inadequate. I play one note, and one note comes out. So I have to do a lot with that. And I think we all do look to replicate the human voice. And Indian musicians are taught to sing, and jazz musicians are taught to sing and vocalize, and Indian percussionists in a lot of traditions vocalize. But, when I first sat with Krishna and watched him tune his sitar, it was such a mind-boggling revelation, to really see how he can create a world within each raga. And each raga has so much depth and so much meaning, as Sanjoy was saying, time of day, season of year, certain ethos and pathos that each raga is looking to create.
So before we start looking at the jazz tradition, Krishnaji, back to you. Tell us a little bit about the structure of a rag and why is it so special and evocative?
Expression of human emotions, like for instance, afternoon is Tivra Madhyam, the sharp fourth, expresses the feeling in the afternoon. And morning ragas are like a child awakening, we don't know how the day is, we can plan, but we never know how it's going to turn out. So morning ragas have this devotional, childlike quality, and evening, as the evening progresses, it gets more romantic and sensual or all different moods are there.
And within a rag, of course, again, there is a division.
Yes, yes. In a performance, the first part of the rag usually is very spiritual and devotional, and it's called the alap, where you
That's the introduction. That's where you
Yes,
draw in the audience.
yes. Perhaps you can talk better about such things. But one thing I realized pursuing this music is that music is the absolute truth. You cannot hide anything. You can hide in any other respect your wealth, your age, your this and that. But as soon as you hit one note on a musical instrument, you're naked, you're revealed, like where you are. And so it's the closest thing to supreme being, or I find that music is the best meditation, and way to we sit many times, and mind is just, but when you play music, that's like the deepest form of meditation, and for me. And
George, so within the larger, the Western jazz tradition, and we'll start with that for a second, like in the way that, there's an introduction and an alap, and then you move to the next movement, and then you finish with a crescendo. How does it sort of set its space within the jazz tradition? Is it an equivalent that allowed you then to discover on these two beautiful instruments the Indian raga tradition?
Well, I have to say, I'm 67 years old, and I have been dramatically influenced by Indian classical music for a good 50 almost 50 of those years. So,
or longer, past life stuff. This is not
as well
necessarily.
as the past life. So I can't, in many ways, I can't extricate myself from the influence of sitting with my teacher, Pandit Pranath, who was a very old school khayal vocalist. But for me, that essence of spirituality, I think, is where I saw the first connection, because I was deeply attracted to the music of John Coltrane. And for those of you who don't know, John Coltrane is a great American saxophonist, African-American saxophonist, who was both a harmonic innovator, a technical innovator on his instrument, as well as kind of a spiritual avatar whose music survives both in its powerful influence as music and then as also spiritual path. One of his outstanding works is called A Love Supreme. So for me, I was deeply involved in studying the music of John Coltrane when I heard the music of India, and that was really the big parallel for me.
One of the things you talked about, which is quite different, is you said you learned your music from a person who wasn't necessarily a saxophonist, the Indian tradition. Whereas in the Western tradition, if you're going to be a singer, you go to choir school or you go to an opera singing style, or if you're learning saxophone, you go to a saxophone teacher. But in India, you can learn your music from any of the traditions.
Well, I think everyone looks, I think many, Krishna, if he wants to teach me something, well, he doesn't have to have his instrument there. He'll sing it to me. Jazz musicians will sing it. Hari Prasad Chaurasia, who's one of the,
great flautists of our time.
Of India, one of the great musicians of the last century. I would go, fly to England, let's say, to perform with him, and we'd sit down at a table, have a cup of tea, and he would sing a little bit and say, okay, bus, we'll go play for 2 hours now. We have enough information. So the voice conveys what's going to happen. The belief in our ability to have a conversation, to listen to each other, to respect each other's musical space, to give as well as to take inspiration.
And jazz music was also in some ways a protest music, right? It broke from the traditional musical orchestra tradition.
Very much so, and it's very much an music of the African, the enslaved Africans who were brought to to the Americas, and brought with them musical traditions. And we talk about the blues as being the underpinning, the concept of call and response, which you do see in Indian classical music as well. We call it Sawal Jawab, question and answer, where either two melodic instruments will have a conversation, or the melodic instrument and the rhythm instrument will trade musical phrases. But jazz has evolved from that time period where, well, first it was, you look at New Orleans and going up to Chicago, coming to New York, the bebop period. Part of what they did was play music that was incredibly complex rhythmically and harmonically, in order to kind of separate themselves from the ordinary. And those musicians, they were all, primarily Black Americans who suffered great indignities while they were also being lauded as superstars. They were traveling around the country. They were
traveling around the country, not being allowed to stay in the same hotels as
they couldn't
perhaps
even walk
some
in
of
the
them.
front door of the clubs they were performing in. So there's a big part of that music that somebody like me, a white American, is not, although I'm aware of it, it's not part of my DNA. And it's something that reality is something that I am aware of.
Will you tell us a little bit about your instruments and
Sure.
also the provenance of them? Because we were having that conversation, and the
Okay.
fact that you can't quite walk into Walmart and pick up this.
These saxophones are both made by Henri Selmer, which is a French company. The saxophone was invented, it's a fairly young instrument, invented in the 1840s by a Belgian instrument maker named Adolphe Sax, hence the name saxophone. As this looks older than it is, it's been around the world many times. It's spent a lot of time in India, which I don't know that it really appreciates. It finds it a little humid over there. But it's made out of brass, but it's kind of a hybrid instrument between a brass and a woodwind. All the sound is generated really by this thin piece of cane, this reed, very delicate, but then it becomes amplified, and its voice is
Are we going to listen to the
defined
voice?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that Sanjoy mentioned before we got up here is this difference between Indian music, which is strictly modal. Like when you prepare for a performance, Krishna will tune his sitar to a raga, to a set of 7 notes, generally. And his instrument is designed to evoke all the feeling in that one set of notes, in that one mode. Saxophone and Western instruments in general are designed, and I should say that he won't vary what we call the tonic, the root note from which all the other notes emanate. The Western instruments are designed to play from every sur, from every tonic. So we have this is what's called a chromatic instrument. So I'll demonstrate just, when I pick up my instrument in the morning, I generally play a little pattern that lets me know that all the notes are working on the instrument. Which this instrument does very well and very easily. If I showed that to probably the most advanced Indian classical musicians, they'd go like, it doesn't make a lot of sense in the realm of Indian classical music. But people like Jay Gandhi, who's sitting here, who's been raised in the West playing an Indian instrument, his ears are attuned to that. Someone like Hari Prasad Chaurasia, maybe when he was younger would go, okay, what does it pay? I'll learn to play it for your film. But as a classical musician, he'll go, Bas, this is your thing, great. We've already perfected it for 5,000 years. We're gonna stick with raga. So, but many of the, it's really interesting now for me. Like I said, I've been doing this for 40 years in a pretty serious fashion. there's now a crop of younger musicians coming up of South Asian origin who were born in the West with their ears focused on all these musics. So we're really hearing, I think, a new kind of evolution in kind of, shall we say, Indian-flavored modern music. And it's really interesting for me to watch people like Jay and his milieu that are blending traditions and aware of pretty vast traditions that when I was coming up, the people I started performing with were from the older generations, and they might have been aware. I mean, certainly Zakir has a very broad view, but the classical musicians were pretty much fully content to live in the world of raga.
So being facetious, George, what is it about the saxophone that is this, seen to be this great chick bait? You know, you perform a saxophone, the chicks will come running.
You know,
where did it get that sort of?
Somehow Hollywood has amplified that thing. There's a sex scene, a love scene, and it's like woo 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 comes up on the saxophone. And over these many years, and it's really annoyed my wife, women will come up to her and go, "Does he play for you in the bedroom?" And she's like, "No, he's got a studio out and back."
But is it also because of the quality of the timbre, of the note?
I think it's evocative like a human voice. I think, as you were saying earlier, that's kind of what we as instrumentalists look for. And that's what I love about particularly the tenor saxophone. I kind of speak and sing in kind of a baritone voice, which I think the tenor kind of evokes pretty well. It does have a very wide dynamic range. It can play very soft and subtly. It can travel pretty far along the sonic spectrum.
In the way that in the Indian, both Carnatic as well as the North Indian tradition, as you grow older and your instrument grows with you, you play it differently. You mature with the instrument. Is that true, George, for Western instruments? Did you play differently 40 years ago than you do now?
I certainly hope so. Yeah, I think as we get mature as artists, what we're ultimately looking to do is express who we are. And hopefully as we get older, in any realm, we have a better understanding of who we are. And
Not necessarily. You have a president who
No, I said
to.
I said hopefully. No, there are folks who are stuck deep in the mud. But as artists, we have that real kind of blessing and responsibility to look inward, to constantly study who are we and what are we doing with this music. You know, I'm a musician, and I know Krishna is, who, you know, gets up every day and has to deal with music on some level. Otherwise, we don't feel we've breathed. We don't feel we deserve the oxygen we're breathing. We don't feel, or at least for me, you know, that my mental health is where it should be if I'm not interacting with my music.
Krishna ji, when did you come to America?
I came in the 70s, initially, late 70s.
And when did you start collaborating with the Western tradition?
I think George has a lot to do with this. And then I have worked with composers and in film situation. And one of the person that I toured and played a lot was Terry Riley, who is a mutual friends of ours. And we have done touring together and playing. And Terry also is an exponent of raga music. He studied all his life.
So when you came, had the Beatles already made the sitar sexy? I'm assuming Woodstock hadn't yet happened, so that generation hadn't quite discovered the sitar. Did you find that difficult to be able to explain to people what this bizarre instrument was?
bizarre instrument. I mean, the
Sitar. I mean, in the American context, मतलब ये क्या है?
No, well, when I had to laugh when I heard the earlier recordings of George Harrison playing that. It sounded
The
really
first lot.
awful. Norwegian wood, and I said, really? Why are you doing this? For what? You know, but then realized that it was due to the Beatles that Indian music got on a platform that it was, and with Raviji and pioneer musicians of the time, they took it, you know, they known to everybody, and on the mainstream, it became a popular instrument. And
Sitar for a long time was like Indian cricket. Like everybody knows Indian cricket. Cricket is dominant. Everything else is, you know, whatever. Sitar was the sort of predominant musical instrument, at least in the
yes,
West.
yes. Well, I I think that everything has a period, and you know, and especially in America, things come and go and become like a fad and fashion for a while. But for us, you know, it's just forever, and even one life is not enough for this.
You know, Krishna ji, in today's TikTok age, you know, phone and social media, everything has to be 20 seconds or 30 seconds. The rag, just the alap segment, you can perform for an hour. In a typical
You
concert,
can,
you can do for 3 hours. Have you had to change the way that you perform?
you know, it takes you in a deeper state of mind. You know, if you, the longer, alap is supposed to be the best part of raga. And other things are a lot of playing around and
Showmanship.
showmanship and technique and this and that. But a rag dari, it goes, pierces to
That's
the
the
heart.
evocative segment. That's what really comes from the
Yeah.
gut.
And, you know, depending on your imagination and the training, of course, you know, we have to be trained and we go through this rigorous practicing and for years and years. And then you begin to understand the essence, the gist, the juice of what raga is. You know, it's like, again, meditation, and raga is the most.
George, when you started discovering Indian music, did you change the way that you had to play?
Well, I had to somewhat moderate my playing to fit with certain things, just like the acoustic nature of this instrument. I generally don't play the tenor saxophone when I'm playing with bansuri or sitar. The soprano saxophone offers a much more gentle sound. So, you know, I wouldn't say I consciously changed the way I played, but I looked to understand the way an Indian musician would play. I spent a lot of time studying the music, recorded music of Hari Prasad Chaurasia, as well as, you know, doing vocal practice. So, listening to the tambura, listening to those overtones that come naturally out of the tambura. When I would first sit with Krishna, you know, I knew there was a cycle tintal, and like many musicians, Krishna would just start playing the composition. He wouldn't count it off. He wouldn't tell me where it's starting. And, you know, I've learned since it's often starting 5 beats before 1. And, you know, but I'd be like swimming in it going, where's the ground beneath my feet, you know? And so I would have to open my mind. I would have to kind of trust myself. You know, I definitely was thrust into deep water where I didn't necessarily belong, but found myself swimming, sometimes on stage in front of large audiences. But, you know, I considered it all part of the adventure, part of...
So yesterday you both performed together for about an hour. So how much of rehearsal did you do?
I would say none, because My dear Krishna, we've been fortunate that he was in California just a few weeks ago, and we sat together and we played, and we learned pieces of his, and I would say, okay, play that again into my phone. I would go study it, and I would learn composition after composition, knowing full well that that would not be what we would perform. And we were at sound check, and we played some particular composition in a particular raga, and I was like, great, this is great. We came to do this show, and he looks at me and goes, no, let's not do that. And, no indication of what it's going to be, but, I trust him. I trust myself a little bit. I trust Bhagwan as well, and, hopefully nobody's going to get hurt.
So what are we going to find today, this afternoon? A piece of music together.
Me? No.
This is in Lucknow, which is in the middle India. Everybody says you first. That's the sort of custom. So that's what they got into right now. You, no, you, no, you. Amazing. Totally amazing. So, can you tell us how, because you were playing off each other, and that's pretty much part of the jazz tradition also. You keep experimenting within the meter. But is the meter set?
In this case, it was, yes, which I figured out somewhere along the way.
Yeah, the meter is like 4 4 4. It was teen tal.
And of course, there's many different ways. The meter itself keeps changing
Yes,
according to the rag.
it's
Can you
all
just tell us a few of the meters that?
like everything is based on 4, and then you can divide 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 5 5 1 2 3.
And you have a half beat as well.
Yes, yes. Just like, the notes, we also use microtones, all the ragas, very, very precision of pitches. And that's very important. Plus, that kind of training, we have this tradition, oral tradition, Guru Shishya Parampara, that you sit with the teacher and you try to imitate repetition and the voice and the finer points of music, which, we were taught that there's no harmony in our music. So the melody, all the notes have to be so strong that you don't need the harmony. And the notes will express human emotions, from, yes.
But isn't that quite completely in contrast to the Western classical tradition? I'm talking about the Western classical tradition as opposed to jazz or African.
Well, I don't fully believe that an instrument like the sitar doesn't deal with harmony. One of the things Krishna does is play multiple notes at the same time. He can demonstrate that. I lost my mic there. And I believe also when I listen to certain ragas that what we in the West understand as harmony is implied by the melodic movement. I mean, the sur, the tonic never changes in a raga performance. But one thing that there are certain ragas, you are played with a tambura, which is tuned, for those of us who are aware of music, to the tonic or the 1, if you're counting up the scales. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the tambura is tuned to 1 and 5. Sometimes, though, the tambura is tuned to 1 and 4. And that kind of changes the feeling where the 4th degree feels like the tonic. And if you listen to the great masters rendering those ragas, it's like they're playing, and yes, 4 is tonic, 4 is tonic, 4 is tonic, and then suddenly they come back to 1, and you go, oh no, that's really where home is. So I think they do play around with that feeling of what I call sort of tonal gravity, these relationships between the notes, which I envision as being kind of like the planets. Each one pulls on each other. So I think that same feeling is there. They haven't changed their instruments. Like the piano's been adjusted so that the perfect fifths are there, but the thirds are kind of out of tune. Krishna plays pure intervals and pure thirds. So we in the West, especially in orchestral and music that's related to the piano, have compromised some of our perfect intonation to create this ability to stack notes. I don't know. I don't think they're as far apart as they sometimes appear.
Well, philosophy of music across at some point is the same. It's really about discovery. It's about, reaching a particular space. And the great musicians have all been from a particular space, and that space is not.
I think so. Looking inward, looking upward, looking in a human capacity. I mean, the masters of European music, many of them were employed by the church. They were attempting to express the divine. Obviously, the music coming out of the Vedas was intended to express the divine.
And the last question before I open it up is, what about the audience? What's their role? I mean, in gospel music, of course, it's to really, capture their soul, bring their heart out, get them to sing out. Similarly, with political protest music, music has been there to inspire, to lead forward. But for you all, within the jazz and the classical tradition, where does an audience sort of fit? Do they fit at all? Are you interested in
Very
that?
much so. I mean, there's a feedback loop. If we're touching their hearts and they're sending that heart energy back to us, we feel it. In Indian classical music, like in a jazz concert or a gospel church, people say, wow. People will get excited. They'll look to clap on the one when somebody's finishing a T high. So audience participation on a intellectual, visceral, and emotional level is quite, it feeds us on stage.
And does it change for you, Krishna, when you walk into a concert space? Do you immediately then realize today, okay, I'll not sing this? Like Kishori Amonkar comes onto stage, throws everybody off under the bus and says, I'm going to sing something else.
Yes, it does. It make a big difference, one of the musicians that is like my ustad, my teacher, has been Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab. One time he told me that you have two eyes and there are 100 people sitting with 100, they are looking. So try to become one with them or have the audience feel, what you're trying to communicate and say. So when you become one, that's a success of,
That's the success. Any questions from the house? Anybody with a question? Do we have a mic? Sorry, we're recording, so we need a mic.
So could you please tell us what the raga was that you played, the Jugalbandi?
Just now?
The demo?
Yes, it's a raga called Saraswati, Raga Saraswati. It is a pentatonic, there are three kinds of scales, pentatonic, having 5 notes, and then 6 notes and 7 notes.
And it's an invocation as well.
Invocation, yes.
Yeah, and then one more question. So you talked a little bit about the harmony and how the sitar provides the harmonies within the strings and so on. In jazz music, do you have harmonies only with an orchestra, or how do you?
Well, it depends. A pianist playing by themselves can provide harmony and rhythm. I can outline harmonies. It won't be as obvious if I'm playing solo saxophone. The sort of standard instrumentation for a jazz performance is often a quartet where you'll have a melodic instrument, a bass, drums, and then a piano or a guitar. So together everybody kind of creates the harmonic motion as well as the rhythmic interaction. And usually in traditional jazz, the harmonic structure, the sort of linear movement between the chords is delineated beforehand, but how that journey takes place is left to improvisation. Yeah.
I'm sorry, we have run out of time. If Serena was here, I would have asked her to come and join in a collaboration, and I was actually looking to Linda if she wanted to come and do some poetry with them, but my colleagues who are the dictators here have said we're out of time. So thank you so much, Krishna ji. Thank you, George, for coming all the way out to Awaken, Florida. It's our honor and pleasure to have you both here and perform last evening and be in conversation with you. More power and strength, and may the force of music be with both of you. Thank you. Thank you.
To present a small token of appreciation and gratitude from our end.